When you look at the world today, the problems seem too big to touch. Spreading deserts, warming oceans, and widespread human rights abuses can feel like a tidal wave crashing down on everyday life. Faced with that sheer scale, it makes sense that so many young people shut down. Youth advocates point out that this reaction is actually a form of emotional survival mode. It's a psychological defense mechanism to cope with the agony of problems that appear entirely out of your control. But this retreat into apathy is incredibly dangerous for a democratic society. When citizens stop seeing the point of taking part in civic life, the entire system loses the friction and engagement it needs to stay healthy. Apathy isn't the result of a generation not caring. It is a direct reaction to feeling powerless against giant, immovable institutions. We usually assume that actual power only belongs to massive governments or multinational corporations. We think that unless you have a massive global platform, you have zero influence on the world stage. That assumption is wrong. True global citizenship means recognizing and pulling four distinct levers of power that are already wired into your daily life: your choices as a consumer, your role in organizations, your work in business, and your voice in government. You don't need to be a superstar to exert influence. You just have to systematically apply pressure across those four everyday spheres. The first lever is right in your wallet. Every purchase you make is a dollar vote. When consumers intentionally buy from ethical companies or withhold their labor and money to protest unfair practices, they are exercising direct economic clout. An isolated boycott by 6 teenagers won't dent a multinational's profits. But when thousands of people coordinate their actions, like the rise of green consumerism driving widespread demand for organic goods, companies have to adapt to survive. That brings us to the second lever: organizations. Flying alone to another country to volunteer might yield very little. However, joining an established non-governmental organization gives an individual access to funding, logistics, and decades of local expertise, multiplying their raw effort. Moving from an isolated consumer to an organized community member teaches vital collaborative skills. Learning how to negotiate, resolve conflict, and build consensus turns individual frustration into coordinated, effective agency. The third lever exists inside the boardroom. Corporations don't operate in a vacuum. They rely on society granting them a license to operate, meaning they are ultimately accountable to the public. This dynamic creates an expectation of corporate social responsibility. Ethical businesses are expected to protect the environment, ensure safe working conditions, and actively give back to the communities where they generate their wealth. But the execution gets complicated fast. Take the Canadian oil company Nexen, operating in Equatorial Guinea. The company invested directly in local schools and public health labs. Yet, by doing business there, their tax dollars were enriching a corrupt regime known for human rights abuses. Engaging with corporate power means looking past the marketing surface. You have to critically evaluate a company's total systemic impact on a region, rather than accepting their charitable projects at face value. The final lever is the ballot box. While individuals can enact local change, sustained domestic pressure is what ultimately forces governments to negotiate solutions for massive global crises. In the 1990s, intense public concern over ozone depletion and global warming led to the Kyoto Protocol, an international agreement designed to compel developed countries to drastically reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. The treaty sparked a fierce economic debate. Leaders like the UK's Tony Blair championed the process as a massive step in collective global responsibility, while others worried the aggressive targets would destroy their domestic industries. Ultimately, leaders like Stephen Harper and George W. Bush rejected or withdrew funding from the protocol's targets. They argued that the science was still evolving and that the required emission cuts would cause massive economic layoffs. Government legislation is the most powerful tool we have for enacting global change. But because treaties are highly vulnerable to economic fears and shifting political winds, they require relentless, ongoing citizen pressure to survive. We often define citizenship by a set of legal markers: holding a passport, paying taxes, and obeying the laws of the land. Canadian educator Gordon Martel views it differently. He describes citizenship as a composite story, a living record built from the diverse struggles, historical pain, and modern triumphs of all the people within a society. Martel experiences this firsthand. He holds deep pride as a Canadian citizen, while simultaneously working to dismantle systemic injustices as an advocate for his First Nations treaty rights. True citizenship isn't an automatic status you passively hold in a drawer. It is an active identity you practice every day by engaging with the multiple communities around you. The only effective cure for global apathy is stepping out of emotional survival mode. It requires deliberately pulling the levers of consumer, organizational, corporate, and governmental power. You don't have to solve every crisis overnight. The most profound way to influence the world stage is simply ensuring that the career you choose, the purchases you make, how you spend your time, all reflect your deepest values. Global citizenship is the ultimate rejection of powerlessness. It is the realization that the world is shaped by the compound force of our deliberate, everyday choices.